They say home is where the heart is. But what they don't tell you is how it feels when your heart is yanked out of your chest while you're still smiling. That Thursday afternoon, the sun filtered gently through my lace curtains, casting patterns onto the wooden floor I'd polished every Sunday since 1985. I sat in my favorite armchair near the window, watching my roses sway in the garden, red Eden climbing. My husband loved those. I was humming, knitting a scarf for my youngest grandson, when I heard the familiar slam of a car door and the heavy thud of designer shoes on the walkway. Derek never tiptoed. He marched through life like it owed him something. "Hey, Ma," he said, pushing the door open without knocking. He didn't even glance at the flowers I'd arranged on the table. "Hello, sweetheart," I said, folding the scarf and rising to put the kettle on. "Want some tea? Can't stay long. Just thought I'd check on you." His voice was casual, too casual, like he was already halfway out the door. That's how he always was with me, lately present but distant. Like visiting a museum. He used to care about Dot. As I reached for the kettle, I saw him scanning the house. His eyes weren't admiring. They were evaluating. "This place could really use some upgrades, huh?" he said, tapping a crack in the kitchen tile. I paused. "It's held together just fine. Better than some marriages, I'd say." He chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You know, Ma, you've got a lot of unused space here. Yeah, just one person now. Why not downsize?" I turned to him slowly. "'Cause this isn't just a house, Derek. It's where your father and I raised you. It's where you took your first steps." Sure, he said, glancing at his phone. "Just thinking about your comfort, that's all. And hey, liquidating some equity now could mean more freedom for you. Less to clean, less to worry about." I smiled, but not with my heart. I'd heard that tone before from salesmen. We sat in awkward silence while the kettle boiled. I poured him tea in his father's cup, though he never noticed. He took one sip, then set it down like it tasted like dust. "I'll get some professionals to evaluate this place soon," he said, checking his watch. "No stress. It's just exploring options." Something prickled in my chest, but I nodded anyway. I didn't want to fight. Derek had been different since his promotion. Sharper, louder, and always busy. After he left, I found myself staring at the teacup he abandoned. The rim still had a smudge from his lip. He always wore the expensive kind. I washed it gently, even though I wanted to slam it into the sink. That night I felt tired, strangely tired. I hadn't even made dinner. I sipped some chamomile and sat down to rest just for a moment. I thought about calling my friend Edna to complain about Derek's visit, but my body felt heavy, like the air had thickened. The last thing I remember was the sound of a car outside and the echo of my own thoughts. "Don't let them move you, Margaret. Not until you're ready." I woke up the next morning to the sound of birds chirping. The light was different, brighter, colder, and the door wouldn't open. My hands shook as I twisted the knob again. Nothing. I went around back to the kitchen door. Dot locked. I stood there in my robe, in slippers, confusion crashing into panic. On my own house, locked. My garden, visible through the window, had a giant orange construction marker staked into the ground. That's when I saw Derek's car pull up. He stepped out, smiling like a realtor on closing day. "You're up early?" he said. I didn't answer. "What's going on? Why is my house locked?" "Oh, right, meant to tell you yesterday," he said casually. "The sale went through. Got a great offer. We're transferring ownership today." I stared at him. "What sale?" "You signed the paperwork, remember? At your birthday dinner." "That stack of forms I brought over?" My breath caught. "You told me that was health insurance updates." He shrugged. "Well, technically it included those. And the house deed transfer. But Ma, it's all for the best. You don't need a whole property. I've got a guest suite ready for you at my condo. It's way better view." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Instead, I did what I always did. I nodded like I understood and walked back to the bench on my front porch. I sat down and watched a bird land on the bird bath I'd installed when Derek was 12. It splashed once, then flew away. Later that day, a moving truck arrived. Young men in neon vests began carrying out my chairs, my husband's old stereo, even the photo frame of our wedding from the living room wall. I wasn't allowed back inside. A neighbor came by with concerned eyes and a nervous voice. "I thought you were on vacation," she said. "Derek told us you wanted to be closer to the city." Didn't correct her. I didn't have the strength. That evening, Derek escorted me to his sleek Hi-Res in the city. The guest room was cold and smelled like plastic. His wife barely looked at me. My things were boxed and stacked in a corner, like luggage that overstayed. "It's welcome." He patted my shoulder. "Just until we get things fully settled. You'll love it here, Ma." I nodded again. That's what I was supposed to do. But while I sat alone in that unfamiliar room, packing a lifetime into a dresser drawer, I reached for the old wooden box I always kept closest. Inside, beneath my birth certificate and a yellowing wedding photo, was a single folder. On the tab, Contingency Estate, only if needed. I'd written that label the day after my husband passed, and tonight it was needed *. The guest room Derek had prepared for me smelled like fresh paint and something meticular. Maybe, but cold, not lived in. There was no soul in it, only a bed too stiff and a window that opened to a wall of another. Condo. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at a bland gray dresser, trying to breathe. I wasn't crying. I was beyond that. What I felt was harder, like a bruise spreading inward. I looked at my belongings, still in boxes, each one taped tightly shut, as if even my memories were now considered clutter. The folder I brought with me sat quietly on my lap. Contingency Estate. My husband, Robert, had always been the cautious one. After his stroke, he became obsessed with paperwork, wills, trusts, backup plans. I used to tease him, "Are you preparing to haunt us or just to confuse us?" But he'd insisted. "Just in case, Margaret, if Derek ever gets greedy." Back. Then I'd brushed it off. Okay, I never thought I'd actually use it. Now I was living under my son's roof not as a guest, but as an unwanted burden. He said the guest suite was temporary, but he never mentioned how temporary. I had no house, no key, no kitchen of my own. Everything familiar was gone in one night. Sold like a car. The next morning, I shuffled into the kitchen and found Derek's wife, Jillian, sipping a smoothie and scrolling on her phone. "Oh," she said, barely glancing at me. "Didn't think you were up yet?" "I usually get up with the sun," I said. "Old habits." She wrinkled her nose slightly, like my presence gave off a smell. "There's oatmeal in the pantry. And please don't use Derek's coffee maker. It's a specialty import." I nodded. Of course. The oatmeal was in a tin labeled dog treats. I pretended not to notice. Derek came home late that evening, talking loudly on the phone. "Yeah, man, flipped it in one go." She didn't even fight it. Old folks don't care once you give them the illusion of comfort. I froze in the hallway. His voice carried into the room. "Nah, I've got her tucked away. She'd just. I mean, what's she gonna do while you're up? Doesn't even check her emails." I stepped back before he saw me. Later, when he noticed me, he smiled like he'd done me a favor. "You all right here, Ma?" "Everything good?" "Wonderful," I said, forcing a smile, though I'm not sure if I'm allowed to touch anything. He laughed. "Hey, enjoy the rest. You earned it." Then he disappeared into his room, leaving me with the humming fridge and the silence of exile. That night, I couldn't sleep. I opened the contingency folder again, the soft rustle of aged paper soothing me more than any lullaby. Inside were copies of documents Robert and I had prepared. The property title, the trust agreement, a signed clause written in Robert's careful handwriting with one critical detail. In the event that our son attempts to alter ownership of the home or liquidate the estate without full cognitive and legal consent from Margaret Walker. All transfers shall be nullified pending legal review. Assets held in trust shall be frozen immediately until evaluated. And it was signed, notarized. Witness. I held it in my hand like a loaded gun. The next morning, I didn't join them for breakfast. I took the folder and stepped out quietly, calling a number I hadn't dialed in years. "Hello?" A warm voice answered. "Is this James Marshall?" A pause. "Mrs. Walker." "Oh my God, it's been years. How are you?" "I need a favor," I said. "Something private. Something urgent. I'll be at your location in 1 hour." James arrived wearing a gray suit and carrying a briefcase. I met him in the park behind the condo. It was the only place I could breathe. He sat beside me on a bench. "What happened?" "My son sold my house," I said, my voice flat. "While I was asleep. I didn't know I signed anything." James opened the folder and scanned the papers, nodding. "This trust is real. Your husband built it well. And that clause, it holds up. Can we undo it?" "No," he said. "We can do. Better, we can freeze his assets." I blinked. "If your son profited through misrepresentation, especially with cognitive manipulation or fraud, we can trigger the emergency protection clause. It doesn't just reverse the transaction. It shuts down everything he controls that's tied to this estate, including his business, his home loan, and his bank accounts." I looked at him. "Do it." He stewed. "I'll have to file this in probate and civil court. It won't be loud, but it will be thorough. Don't call him," I said. "Let him find out like I did." When I returned to the condo, Derek was pacing. "Where were you?" "Getting some air," I replied, removing my coat slowly. "Well, next time, tell someone. This isn't a neighborhood for old folks." I smiled. "Neither was the house you sold, but I managed there just fine." He didn't respond. Over the next few days, I noticed little changes. His card was declined at a restaurant. He yelled on the phone more often. "What do you mean the escrow is frozen? Why's the business account locked?" At night, his voice bled through the walls. "No, I didn't force her. She's my mother. She signed, didn't she?" And I sat on the other side of the wall, knitting in silence, the scar for my grandson growing longer by the hour. On the 7th day, the knock came. Derek opened the door to a court officer with a clipboard. He didn't speak at first. Then, with shaking hands, he turned to me. "What did you do?" Asterisk, he stood there, in his expensive robe, hair wild and voice shaking not from fear, but from entitlement cracking. "What did you do?" Derek shouted again. I looked up from my knitting, slow, steady, deliberate. The click of the needles echoed louder than his voice. Funny, isn't it? How rage can shrivel when it meets calm. "You froze my accounts," he said, storming across the living room. "My business funds, my personal card, my home equity line." "What the hell, Mom?" I set the yarn aside, folded it neatly, and placed it in my lap. I activated the trust. I said softly, "You." "What?" He blinked like the word trust was foreign in this house. "You remember the folder I always kept under the bed?" I continued. "It wasn't recipes. Your father. And I created a clause one designed for this exact betrayal." He paced in furious little circles, mouth moving before his brain. "That house was mine. You signed it over. Don't try to play innocent." "I didn't read what I signed," I said plainly. "'Cause I trusted you, like a fool." Derek froze mid-step. "That's not my fault. You should have asked." "No," I said, standing. "You should have told me the truth. You should have looked your mother in the eye and said, 'I want your house. I want what you built. And I don't care how you feel about it.' That would have been honest, at least." For a second, something flickered behind his eyes. Guilt. No, just fear of consequence. He dropped onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. "I needed that." "Sale to close," he muttered. "I'm in deep, Ma. I made promises." "You made none to me," I said. "And don't call me Ma like we're back at the dinner table, Derek. That man is long gone." Later that night, I heard him yelling. "On the phone again?" The walls in this modern place were thin. I don't care if it triggers probate. She's senile. Just say she was manipulated by someone else. I want the reversal reversed. There was a long pause. Then a quieter, more bitter voice. Are you saying she still owns my condo? He slammed something against the wall. Picture fell. I didn't flinch. Instead, I opened the sliding door of my guest room and stepped out onto the balcony. The air was crisp, the city lights blinking far below like a world I no longer belonged to. It reminded me of the attic back at the old house, quiet, dusty, filled with forgotten things. Except now the forgotten thing was me the next morning. Jillian didn't say a word to me, shoved a cold coffee pot into the machine and walked out. The children, my grandchildren, sat at the counter with cereal bowls, eyes glued to their tablets. They didn't even look up, didn't greet me. I was just a figure in their periphery, an old person who didn't understand TikTok or oat milk. I smiled anyway, not for them, for myself, because I knew what was coming. By noon, James texted me. Freeze confirmed. Review hearing scheduled. Title reverted. Full power of estate reinstated. I walked into the living room where Derek sat in his boxer shorts, scrolling frantically on his phone. He looked up. Mom, I held up my hand. Don't. He stood quickly. Look, I made a mistake. Okay, a big one. I panicked. I thought selling the house would solve everything, and you thought you would get away with it, I said, stepping closer. And maybe you would have, if I hadn't remembered who I was. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a manila envelope. Inside were the reinstated documents. I placed it gently on the coffee table. You'll be receiving a formal notice of eviction, I said. The condo is part of the estate, which, as of this morning, is under my sole control. His mouth fell open. You're evicting me? No, I said. You evicted me the night you locked me out of my home. It's just the paperwork catching up. That evening, I packed quietly. I had already called a cab. James had arranged everything. Derek stood at the door like a lost child, arms crossed. Jillian glared from the hallway. She hadn't spoken a word since learning the condo now legally belonged to me. Where will you go? He asked bitterly. Back to your dusty old house. It's probably a parking lot by now. I smiled, lifting my small suitcase. Not back, I said. Forward. He scoffed. You think this fixes everything? No, I said softly. But it's not my job to fix everything anymore, especially not you. There was a long silence. I gave you my life, Derek, my money, I care, my time. I stitched your name into your backpack in kindergarten. I stayed up with you through chickenpox. I defended you when your teachers called you rude. I helped you hide your report cards, and I forgave you every time you lied. Kay looked away. But you, I continued, you sold the roof over my head while I slept. When I walked outside, the sunlight hit me like a blessing. The doorman nodded respectfully. The city buzzed around me, unaware of the quiet storm that had passed upstairs. James was waiting in the cab. We drove in silence. For a few blocks, then I asked, Is the place ready? He nodded. Yes. A small lakeside cottage, fully furnished. Quiet. Yours and the papers. Filed legally. Your son can't touch anything tied to your estate for the next 5 years unless authorized by you. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes for the first time in weeks. I felt ... safe. As we reached the cottage, I stepped out and took a deep breath. The air was crisp and smelled like pine. Small garden lay to the right, untouched. Inside there was a fireplace, an old rocking chair, and a kitchen that begged to be baked in. I set my bag down, took off my shoes, and sat on the porch swing with a cup of tea, and I thought, he will survive this, maybe even grow from it. But I won't be there to carry him anymore. The first night in my new home, I didn't sleep, not out of fear or anxiety, but because silence had become foreign. After weeks in Derek's apartment, with phones vibrating and tempers flaring behind every thin wall, the quiet felt like being Held, I sat by the window with a blanket around my shoulders, watching the moon reflect on the lake. I didn't cry. I simply exhaled. There was no Derek here. No Jillian. No sideways glances or cold coffee machines. Just me. And the memory of one call that changed everything. It had been 3 weeks since I first reached for that dusty folder. And just 10 days since James filed the paperwork that unraveled Derek's financial kingdom like a loose thread on a cheap suit. The trust Robert and I had built wasn't just a document. It was a safety net woven out of grief, foresight, and quiet love. We had created it during the worst winter of our lives, after Robert's first stroke. When the thought of leaving me alone with a sharp-tongued son terrified him, "You'll need protection," he'd said. "Not from strangers, from the ones who know where the knives are kept." At the time, I thought he was being dramatic. Now, I knew he was just early. The next morning, James called. "It's done," he said. I smiled, sipping my tea. "Tell me." "Your son's assets tied to the family trust, his business accounts, his condo, even his investment portfolios are under audit. Technically frozen until the fraud claim clears. The court already issued a temporary protective injunction. And the condo reverts back to you within 72 hours unless he contests it. But contesting would mean proving he didn't trick you into signing documents under false pretenses. He'd lose." I chuckled lightly. Derek would rather eat glass than admit fault in public. James hesitated. "He's panicking." "I know," I said. Let him. Later that day, I received a text. It's a long one. From Derek: "Mom, we need to talk, please. I didn't mean for it to go this way. I just thought you didn't need that house anymore. I thought I was helping. Jillian's upset. Kate, can we fix this before it goes too far?" I didn't reply. Instead, I walked out to the garden behind my cottage. A kind neighbor, Ruth, had already dropped off seedlings, lavender, and basil. I spent an hour planting them. Dirt under my nails felt more healing than any apology text. As I pressed the soil down gently around the roots, I whispered to myself, "You tried to bury me, Derek, but I'm still growing." 2 days later, I got a voicemail from Jillian. Ice in her voice could have frozen a river. "I hope you're happy. We had to cancel our vacation. Derek's name is mud at his office. Your precious trust ruined everything." I deleted the message. Somewhere deep inside, I wanted to feel guilt, but it never came. Because they weren't sorry for what they'd done, only for being caught. 3 weeks after I left, I received a letter in the mail. A formal one, stamped and sealed. It was from the court. Final confirmation. The house was fully returned to the estate and the financial freeze would remain in place until a review concluded in 90 days. Until then, Derek could not access or liquidate any family-related assets without my approval. Attached was another notice. The condo I had been forced into mine now. I didn't want it, of course. But I smiled at the poetic justice of it all. The same cold box Jillian once refused to let me touch a coffee machine in was now legally under my name. Poetic. And precise. I had James list the condo for rent. The income would go toward a small community fund. I'd always dreamed of starting one that helped elderly women like me who were cast aside by their own children because I wasn't alone. I'd met them at the clinic, in church basements, quietly counting coins. Women who had built lives for their families only to be treated like expired ingredients when they were no longer useful. One call had restored my power. But now I wanted it to restore someone else's. A week later, while watering the basil, I heard tires on gravel. A sleek car stopped outside my gate. Derek stepped out. He looked different. Not in appearance, he still wore the designer shoes and the tailored shirt, but in posture. Smaller, slumped, like a man used to towering over people who'd finally seen his own shadow. I didn't move. He walked up the porch steps slowly, holding something in his hand. A torn envelope. I Didn't know where else to go, he said quietly. There's a front door, I replied, not unkindly. Use it. He knocked. I opened it, but only halfway. I lost my job, he said. The audit spooked the board. They think I'm unstable. I said nothing. I had to pull the kids from private school. Jillian's threatening to leave. Did you come here for pity? I asked. No, he said, lowering his head. Just clarity. He pulled out a folded paper. I reread the documents from Dad. I forgot how detailed he was. How much he protected you. He protected us both, I said. You just didn't read the fine print. We stood in silence. The wind rustled the trees. A bird called in the distance. Do you hate me? He asked. No, I replied, but I don't trust you. Nodded. Fair. I opened the door a bit wider. There's tea, if you want it. He blinked. Really? 1 cup? I said. Then you leave. And you think long and hard about what family means beyond real estate and reputation. He stepped in slowly, as if afraid the house would reject him. I poured the tea. He didn't speak again, and that was enough. As he left, he turned to me. I want to fix it. I don't know how. You can start by never assuming I'm weak again. He swallowed hard. Okay. And then he walked away. Back inside, I sat with my own cup. The sun was setting over the lake, bathing the living room in gold. I smiled softly, not from victory, but from relief, because sometimes the strongest thing a woman can do is make one call and let everything collapse that was built on betrayal. I didn't expect him to return, not after the silence that followed our last conversation. Not after the truth stared him in the face like a mirror he didn't want to look into. But a week later, there he was, again in the same gravel path, same hesitant steps. Only this time, he wasn't alone. Behind Derek stood Evan, my 12-year-old grandson. Backpack slung over one shoulder, thumb hooked through the strap. Eyes flicking between the sky and the porch. My heart twitched. Hi, Grandma, Evan said. His voice had deepened since I'd last heard it. Hi, sweetheart, I said, stepping down the porch. Does your mother know you're here? Derek cleared his throat. She doesn't want to be involved. Of course she didn't. I didn't come to ask for anything, he added quickly. I just thought, maybe Evan could spend some time here. Away from the noise, I looked at my son. His shirt was wrinkled, his beard was uneven. His eyes, once so arrogant, were tired. I looked at Evan next. He looked confused, anxious, like he'd been stuck between 2 towers of adult. Anger with nowhere soft to land. I opened the gate. Come in, Evan, I said. The basil's finally sprouting. We spent the afternoon in the garden, Evan asked. 100 questions about worms, about soil, about whether bees actually sleep. Derek sat on the porch the whole time watching. Quiet. He didn't ask to come inside. I didn't offer that night. After Evan fell asleep in the guest room, his head resting on a book he'd pulled from my shelf, Derek stood at the kitchen door. He looks peaceful here, he said. That's because no one's asking him to. Be perfect, I replied. He nodded slowly. Then he spoke the words I never expected to hear. I'm sorry, Mom. Not in a performative, rushed way. Not in a let's move on way. It was slow, hoarse, real. I thought I was protecting you by taking charge. But I was protecting myself from failure, from consequences. I saw the house as a quick fix, and I forgot it was your life. I didn't speak. I let the silence sit between us like a guest. I don't expect you to forgive me, he continued. But I do hope you believe me when I say, I learned something. I looked him in the eyes. Then here's your first test. I said, start over, without my help. He nodded. I will. But if you ever sell something that isn't yours again, I added, don't expect a gentle storm. Expect thunder. He actually smiled. Just a little. I missed your metaphors, he said. I didn't smile back. Not yet. Over the next week, Evan stayed with me while Derek got his affairs in order. He cleaned up surprisingly fast, found freelance consulting work, started taking public transportation, something he hadn't done in over a decade. He even apologized to James during a legal review meeting, Kay admitting he'd acted without full disclosure. That moment wasn't for me, Kay, it was for the court. But I appreciated it anyway. One evening, while Evan was drawing on the porch, he looked up and asked Grandma, "Why don't you live with us anymore?" I paused. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I didn't want to give him a wound. Sometimes, I said carefully, grown-ups forget how to be kind to the people who raised them. And when they forget for too long, the person being hurt has to walk away, even if it's hard. He blinked. "Did my dad hurt you?" I nodded slowly. "Yes." "Did you hurt him back?" I looked at the lake, then at the child beside Mitha, very reason I hadn't burned the whole bridge down. "No," I said. I just reminded him I was never powerless. The final legal meeting was brief. James handed me the paperwork. The trust protections would remain, but my authority would now be shared conditionally with a neutral third-party advisor to ensure fairness if anything ever happened to me. It was a smart compromise. Derek agreed without protest. We stood outside the building afterward. The air was brisk. Cars passed in waves. "I'll never earn back the years," he said. "No," I agreed. "But you can still earn back your dignity." He nodded. "Thank you for not destroying me." Ugh. I looked at him carefully. "I didn't protect you, Derek. I protected your future, Kay, and you still have to earn it." He swallowed hard. "I will." Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a key. "I know the cottage is yours now," he said. "But this was Dad's. It was with the old house keys." He handed it to me, an old brass key on a faded leather tag. My heart squeezed. I hadn't even realized it was missing. "Thank you," I said. He stepped back then. To my surprise, he added, "I told Evan the truth about what I did. He said he's proud of you." Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, but I held them in. "I'm proud of me, too." That night, after the paperwork was sealed, the apologies made, and the house in the past officially gone, I sat by the fireplace with a notebook out at the top. I wrote in neat block letters. My son sold my house while I was asleep, so I made him homeless with one call then beneath it. But what he gained in the silence was louder than regret. Because sometimes revenge isn't fire and fury. Sometimes stillness. A mother reclaiming her peace, and a son finally learning what family is supposed to mean. I've always loved mornings the most. There's something sacred in the way the world stretches away, quiet, soft, slow. No alarms, no voices. Just light touching the trees and dew blinking off leaves like pearls dot in my old life. I barely noticed it. Mornings were filled with noise. Derek's school lunch, forgotten again. Robert's socks never matched. The doorbell always ringing with someone who wanted something. But here, in this little cottage near the lake, the mornings belonged to me and my petunias. Yes, petunias. Bold, soft, and surprisingly stubborn little flowers. They survive what many plants can't: dry spells, wind, neglect. They bloom anyway, I suppose, in a strange way. I've always felt like it's been 6 months since I left Derek's apartment. 6 months since I chose peace over pride, silence over shouting, and soil over spite. My days now are simple. Mornings in the garden, midday tea by the window. Afternoons volunteering at the local library. Evenings spent writing letters to myself. Little reminders that I am still growing, still blooming, even if no one claps for it. And every Sunday, Evan visits. He brings cookies, store-bought, but thoughtful, and a new drawing for my fridge. He likes to sit on the porch swing and tell me about school, books, and the things his parents don't understand. I just listen, because sometimes listening is the only power we need. One Sunday, Evan brought something new. "Dad says hi," he muttered while handing me a crumpled piece of paper. It was a letter, no envelope, just folded twice. written in Derek's crooked handwriting. Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know I've started therapy. Not for damage control, but because I realized I've never asked myself why I treat people like they're mine to manage. Jillian left. She said she married a man, not a brand. She's right. Been chasing money and control for so long I forgot how to be soft or present or kind. I still remember that night in high school when I crashed Dad's car. You held me all night and never told him. You protected me, even from myself. And I sold your house. I let you wake up to betrayal alone. I don't know how I live with that. But I'm trying to become someone who wouldn't do it again. Thank you for not ruining me. You could have. You had every right. But instead, you reminded me who I was raised to be. With love, Derek. I folded the letter and tucked it into the drawer beside my reading chair. Not because I needed to reread it, but because some wounds deserve space, not salt. 2 weeks later, I got another letter, this time from the city council. My name had been nominated quietly by someone anonymous for the Living Legacy Award for Community Service, for resilience, for starting the Petunias Project, which now supported a dozen elderly women with small stipends and food deliveries. I cried when I read it, not because of the recognition, but because I finally felt like someone again, not a burden. Not a relic. Just Margaret Walker. Alive and useful. The night of the award, I wore my old lavender shawl, the one Robert gave me after his last hospital stay. I pinned his watch to the inside of it, near my heart. The ceremony was small, intimate, held in the town hall. Evan sat in the front row, legs swinging nervously. When they called my name, I didn't shake. I walked up, smiled, and accepted the plaque with both hands. The host leaned in. Your son nominated you, privately. Said you changed more than just a family, you changed a legacy. I didn't say anything, just looked at the boy in the front row and nodded once. That night, back at the cottage, I sat by the fire and opened my notebook. I flipped past pages of thoughts, quotes, flower care, tips, and tea recipes until I found a blank page. Then I wrote, I was betrayed, but not broken. I was discarded, but not destroyed. I was underestimated. And then I bloomed. The next morning, while watering the petunias, I heard footsteps. Not rushed, not angry, gentle, hesitant. I turned, and there stood Derek. He held a tray on it. Small cake, vanilla, my favorite. I didn't know if you'd open the door, he said. I always open the door, I replied. I just don't let anyone walk over the threshold without their shoes clean. He smiled, eyes glassy. They're clean today, he said. I promise. I opened the screen. He stepped in. We didn't talk about the house or the court or what had been lost. Instead, he sat in my kitchen and asked, how do you get petunias to bloom so brightly? I handed him a trowel. You start by listening. As we sat in the garden, hands in the dirt, I felt something shift, not just between us, but in me. Not forgiveness exactly, but something like peace, because in the end I didn't need revenge. I needed to remember that my worth was never written in the title of a house. It was written in the hands that built it, in the roots I planted, in the child I raised, in the strength I reclaimed. And that one phone call, the one that unraveled it all, it wasn't just about justice. It was about reminding the world, Kay and myself, that even an old woman, quiet and forgotten, can rise, stronger, softer, and still blooming. If this story moved you, like, share, and subscribe for more powerful tales of dignity, revenge, and redemption.